Yeah, and we see similar things. I know you dug into in the past year a nonprofit in Fall River, Massachusetts, where it's just one of those situations where it kind of seems like, you're fighting homelessness and poverty, but the people who are actually involved in the nonprofit are getting extremely wealthy with high salaries.
Yeah,
What's the synopsis of that story?
So a few years ago, it got kicked off. A few years ago, a homeless man died. He was laying on some steps, and then he fell asleep. And whether alcohol or drugs involved, that's the guess. People are going to guess. If you drink too much, you fall asleep in the cold, you're going to get hypothermia and died. So he died, and it caused a rift. And then on the radio station, WSAR, they had a Saturday show. Sue Netter had a show. She brought on Christopher Sylvia and Mike Dion, who kind of funds the Stepping Stone. And
Which is what Stepping Stone is?
Stepping Stone is so there's a thing called Stepping Stone. They manage the primary homeless shelter. And I looked up the numbers. They manage like 30 beds, and then they go to 50 during the winter. But Stepping Stone has the first step in, and that's the primary year-round homeless shelter. And then we did a nice video on the Tomeo Center, which is the overflow. Mm-hmm. So when they don't have, if they get to that 50 max, then there's an overflow. And also we know I think it's like considered a dry shelter. So if you're using drugs or alcohol, they won't let you stay there. Tomeo Center is run by a church. They allow anyone in there. So, and we just seen the temperatures this year, right?
Yeah.
Below zero in many ways. And New York, I think, is up to 20 deaths out there. So it's pretty bad this year. So that triggered the CEO to call from Florida. Is the estimate. She was down in Florida with her husband.
The CEO of
Stepping Stone. So I dug and I looked into like how much does this lady make, right? And we found out, and I did some digging. So something that manages 30 beds year round, another 20 in the winter. I was like, how much do they make there? And she makes $250,000 salary, and this was a couple years ago, and another 24 in other conversations. So that's $265,000 to run a 30-bed annual shelter that goes to 50 in the wintertime. And I was shocked by that because I did my due diligence and look, and the average Fall River income is $31,998, and I went even deeper. The mayor of Fall River salary is $122,000, and has far more responsibilities than the nonprofit head of Fall River. The Fall River police chief earns $219,000, or 46 less than the CEO. Governor Healy makes $185,000. Makes even less than this. So you have a nonprofit in Fall River where it makes like 8 times the income of the average person, makes more than twice as much as the mayor, makes more than the governor of Massachusetts to manage 30 beds a year of addiction and homelessness.
Wow. And where does that money come from? And she's not the only one that was making a crazy amount of money over there too. Everyone was in the 6 figures. But where does that money come from? And just how is all of the money spent on salaries, or what's the percentage of money that's spent on salaries? Did you have that information by chance?
Yeah, so the nurse there, the head nurse makes $234,000. The clinical director of behavioral makes $191,000. Director of development, $162,000. A lot of money, way more than the average person is making. The money is primarily from the city and state and federal money, so it's taxpayer money. Mm. There's it's a nonprofit.
And let's not get it twisted. Obviously it's an important duty to take care of the homeless and all that, right? But $250,000 on a salary, you're wealthy, especially in Fall River. You're making that's a good living right there. To $250,000.
Yes.
You're literally becoming over the span of a few years, you're going to have way
$1 million every 4 years.
Yeah. You're going to have way north of
every
a
$3.5
$1 million net worth.
And I had the list here. So Mayor Paul Coogan made $122,000. His chief of staff, who's running day-to-day operations, $100,000. So and that's the problem, right? Is I have a problem with people getting wealthy, helping the poor. Because in my view, you never get rid of the homeless problem if you're making a fortune on it.
Why would you?
Why
if
would
I'm
you?
making $250,000 a year, why would I want to lose that?
People think it's heartless to say, if you want to fix the homeless problem in Fall River, you stop providing resources to the homeless because they'll move on to another community. Other communities don't provide resources, so you go to Fall River.
Or at the very least, all right, if you believe in providing resources, someone making $250,000
volunteer
isn't necessarily a resource. And I don't think that people should work for free, but I just don't think that I don't understand the justification of $250,000.
There's a church in New Bedford. They drive around a vehicle. I can't remember the name. I want to add it in the comments later. I went there, did a documentary on them. They have a truck. Half it is food, half it is clothing. They load it up 6 days a week. They park it 6 days a week somewhere in New Bedford. They give clothing and food 6 days a week. You know how much money they make?
How much?
0. It's volunteer. And that's where I think really needs to happen. I remember I was listening to NPR doing my military duty on the Cape, and I listened to a guy who studied all the money. He said, if you just took all the money that the government spends on poverty and just gave it to everyone below the poverty line, not a single American would live below the poverty line. But 80 to 70% of the money is administrative costs in government or nonprofits.
That's insane. And of course, though, the big rebuttal to that would be you can't just throw money at a problem, right? Like you can't just, here's $100,000, you're homeless, now you're not. There's got to be some type of guidance and counseling and resources like that. But I still don't see how that justifies to $250,000.
Homeless is the worst definition you could provide to what we're dealing with in the streets, because that means if I gave them a home, the problem is solved. But we all know.
We learned this firsthand by doing the little mini doc over there. It's always childhood trauma that leads to addiction, and the addiction or severe mental illness is why they're homeless.
Mental health stems from some kind of trauma in your life, which leads to addiction. Yeah. Right? Everyone knows that, whether someone was sexually assaulted as a child, they had a death in the family, something happened, and what does an opioid do? It blocks the receptors, pain receptors. So it makes sense, right? Alcohol, makes you feel better. Other drugs kind of like that. You're really getting rid of the pain. And then when the drugs wear off or the alcohol wears off, the pain is back. So you keep doing it.
Yeah. And then you build a physical, like you need it.
Yeah. And then you set up these drug treatment centers where the average person goes through it, does it like 15 times, and the government pays for it or the healthcare pays for it. And then we all pay for it because our healthcare goes up. It's a racket, man. It's just money. There's so much money in it. The numbers, we like to dig in the numbers. I bet it's in the trillions of dollars. If you look at the money we spent since Lyndon B. Johnson set up the Great Society and started funding all these public welfare programs, trillions and trillions of dollars, and the poverty rate is not much different.